Okay, I'm gonna start admitting people into the room, and all the participants are gonna be muted upon entry.
Hi, Susan.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Suzanne, how are you? Hi, Nuna.
Hi, Nona.
Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Hi, Lynn.
Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this forum on this uprising and mobilizations in Iran that is hosted by several colleagues and departments at San Francisco State University. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes because people are still signing in. So we're going to let everybody come in. So the meeting is set so everybody is muted upon entry to prevent disturbances, but we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards, so people will be patient.
Oh, Professor Monshipouri is the most amazing professor.
Says who?
You got your fan club.
I thought Maziar was saying that because I owe him a lunch or something.
I've never had you as a professor, but I'm sure you are the most amazing.
That's very kind of you.
Right.
Okay, so it's almost 5 minutes after 3. Maybe we just can get started launching the event, and I will be letting people in as we progress. So I want to welcome everybody to this forum entitled Women, Life, and Freedom that has to do with the recent mobilization of women, but also the Iranian population recently after the murder of Mahsa, Jina, Amini, these Kurdish Iranian women who was beaten by the morality police. And what we wanted to do with this forum is similar to what we did with the 2 past forums we organized on Ukraine. All of us here are faculty members and students of San Francisco State, staff also, but also the community at large. And we truly believe in the role of a public university to be a place where we can learn, educate ourselves, and also have conversations to better interpret the world that surrounds us, right? Because we have many experts and thoughtful thinkers and thoughtful human beings in our university who are also engaged with their communities, with people in Iran, and can give us a better explanation, sometimes more nuanced than the one we get through the media. Sometimes because we don't have access to most of the analysis that is produced in Iran. But also we believe that part of building a university community is to have these spaces, these public spaces among us, to engage in discussion and collective learning, right? So the way we're envisioning this teaching to function today is that first we're going to hear 4 presentations, short presentations from 3 of our colleagues and a recent graduate, right? They're going to be 10 to 12 minutes each. And then we're going to engage in a more conversation, Q&A, so people from the audience or the public can ask questions and we can move further. Before I present the presenters, I just want to say that we're going to ask folks to remain muted throughout the conversation because you know that if you make any noise, it interrupts the hearing of the person speaking. And also to put your questions in the chat, right? We emphasize questions, not so much comments, because if we start having questions and comments, the questions get buried and it's difficult for me, the facilitator, to track the questions, right? So what are we gonna be doing? We hear these 4 presentations, it's gonna take around 40 minutes, and then we're gonna take the questions from the chat and we're gonna bounce them back to our colleagues so they can answer them, right? So we can engage in this moderated back and forth because we want to get the best out of our time. I wanna make sure that everybody has their question answered, right? With that said, well, my name is Blanca Missé. I teach in the French program in the Modern Languages and Literatures department. And my role today here is just to moderate this discussion and also learn from you all, and specifically from our colleagues. We're gonna hear first from Hasti, who's a graduate student from SF State, who's gonna tell us more first-hand information and experience from what is happening in Iran. And we're really lucky to have Hasti here with us today. And I want to thank her for speaking up and coming to this community. And I want to assure you, Hasti, that this is a safe community for you to speak. And we'll make sure that we keep each other safe. And then we're going to hear from Persis Karim, who directs the Center for Iranian Diasporas and Studies. Then we will hear from our colleague Maziar Behrooz from the History Department. And last but not least, our colleague Mahmood Monshipouri from International Relations is going to give a short presentation. And after that, I will pick up the mic and I will be taking questions. So again, if questions come up during the presentations, put them on the chat and I'm going to be compiling them. But without further ado, welcome Hasti, and we're going to listen to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Blanca. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so we are the Iranian Gen Z. We grew up sneaking out of classrooms to eat popsicles. We love our national food, korma sabzi, and pizza too. Most of us went through a Pink Floyd phase. We went to school in the morning looking like this and ended up looking like this by the first recess, despite being humiliated and punished by the headmaster. We learned early on that vans come from hell and vans take you to hell, vans looking like these. We learned that if they caught us wearing our scarves improperly, they beat us, verbally abuse us, force us into the vans, detain us, and imprison us if it happened again. Speaking of prison, we grew up knowing at least one person in jail for just speaking up or peacefully protesting. We went to university seeing our friends disappear and go to prison. We witnessed several surges of protests in the span of many years. Some of us became prisoners ourselves. A great number of us learned that we have no place in our country, so we left. Some of us got shot in airplanes by the military forces when we were leaving. The rest of us died or got arrested on the streets protesting the airplanes being shot. We know how quickly and violently protests are suppressed. We learned by heart that if one of us isn't free, none of us is. Nowadays, you can find us burning our hijabs as we dance on the streets. We dance as these guys, sorry as I navigate, these guys beat us up. Sorry. They're armed, they're brutal, they cut our internet off, they burn buses and say it was us, they attack universities. So we learned to become creative, we learned to become brave. We made a list of things we're fighting for on Twitter. Let me share with you some of the items on that list. Dancing in the valley. Endangered species of Persian panther, for our beloved trees in the valley streets, for kissing without fear, for Mahsa. Mahsa, who got killed by the morality police on September 16th, for Nilufar, who took Mahsa's photo in the hospital knowing it could put her in jail, and it did. Because when Mahsa died, we once again found each other's voices in the dark. For this girl who lost her mom in the protest, she cut her hair and took this photo. For Hadis, who loved to tie her hair behind her head when she wanted to go kick some police ass, she died with bullets. For Nika, who was 17 and sang really well, she went to the protest, she went missing, she was tortured, she died, her aunt and uncle were arrested. For my friend Sarah, who was in prison for 2 weeks, who was freed 3 days ago, she started going to the protest again. For the media silence, we marched the streets of the world, but there's little to no news coverage about us. We're alone in this. All we have is each other. And lastly, for Sherwin, who made a song with that list, which I'm going to be sharing with you. Just give me a minute. As I fumble around with Zoom.
While you're looking for it, I'm going to say who, okay, go ahead. This is a song, right?
Sorry, Persis, what was that?
Introduce a little bit about how he composed the song.
Yeah, so there was this list going on in Twitter of the things we are protesting for, and Sherwin Hajizadeh made a song with that list, and he went to prison for it. Can you hear the...
برای توی کوچه رقصیدن، برای ترسیدن به وقت بوسیدن، برای خواهرم، خواهرت، خواهرامون، برای تغییر مغزها که پوسیدن، برای شرمندگی، برای بیپولی، برای حسرت یک زندگی معمولی، برای کودک زباله‌گرد و آرزوهاش، برای این اقتصاد دستوری، برای این هوای آلوده، برای ولیعصر و درختای فرسوده، برای پیروز و احتمال انقراضش، برای سگهای بیگناه ممنوعه، برای گریه های بیوقفه، برای تصویر تکرار این لحظه، برای چهره ای که میخنده، برای دانش آموزا، برای آینده، برای این بهشت اجباری، برای نخبه های زندانی، برای کودکان افغانی، برای این همه برای غیر تکراری، برای این همه شعارهای تو خالی، برای آوار خونه های پوشالی، برای احساس آرامش، برای خورشید پس از شبای طولانی، برای قرصای اعصاب و بیخوابی، برای مرد میهن آبادی، برای دختری که آرزو داشت پسر بود، برای زن زندگی آزادی، برای آزادی.
Thanks for listening. I'm gonna pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Hasti, for that amazing presentation and your words and that configuration visual that you made for us that really represents the creativity of the movement. And now we're going to hear from Persis, so go ahead, Persis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to Blanca. This was her idea to do this, and there's nothing better than having colleagues who care, you know, so thank you. I'm sorry, I'm so emotional after seeing Hasti's presentation. Thank you, Hasti. She's an amazing young person, and we are so lucky to have her. And my friend and colleague Nona and our other colleague, Michelle Carter, worked so hard to get her here, and it was worth all the struggle. And it was not a struggle at all, because there was nothing compared to what you had to do to get here. I want to talk a little bit about the actual slogan, woman, life, freedom. It's a great slogan. It's probably the best political slogan I've encountered in my lifetime. But I think it's important to contextualize where it comes from and what it means, particularly to the women of Iran, and even as a rallying cry for women around the globe. And I would argue even for our own context, because we're confronting some of the same assaults on women's rights. But the slogan, woman, life, freedom, came from the Kurdish struggle. The Kurdish people are essentially displaced, dislocated people in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And this was a rallying cry for the Kurdish people, who elevated their women soldiers and believed that they were fighting for those three things. But when Mahsa, Jina Amini, was killed by the morality police, it became the rallying cry for Iranians in Iran and now globally, because I think it symbolizes everything that her death means, especially to women and especially to the people of Iran. So I want to also offer, let's see, I'm going to, oops, wrong one. I was going to share with you my screen, but I don't see it. Oh, here it is. Let's see. Can you see my screen? No.
Yes, we're
You
seeing
can?
it. Yes.
Okay. So there's been a longer view of women's rights in Iran. It didn't just spring out of Hasti's generation. It has a much longer trajectory. I'm going to share with you a text from my cousin. Can you guys see this? Okay. I have a cousin in Iran who I keep in touch with, and today was the first day I've heard from her in 3 days. So I was so relieved to get this text today at 1 o'clock. She and another cousin were imprisoned in 1980 after they were protesting the compulsory veil laws that were instituted after the 79 revolution. And it was a gradual, first it was optional, and then eventually it became mandatory. And her text to me today was, looking forward for good news. Hopefully professors of Sharif University are going to have a gathering in the university site to condemn what they did to their students. And if you don't know that, on Monday, Sharif University, which is the most prestigious university in Iran, was attacked by plainclothes police and the Revolutionary Guard Council, and lots of students were rounded up and injured. So that was the last time I heard from her. And she said, people have plans to go out tomorrow, step by step. We've tried every possible other way. We tried voting, even when there was a few acceptable candidates. The next time they let even fewer people to be nominated. We tried reforms. Corruption is a huge barrier to achieve any results. We tried dialogues. They didn't listen. They think that this country is theirs. They have imprisoned us. This land belongs to people who live in it. And what I see in the bravery, particularly among the young women in Iran, is this absolute necessity to fight for their future, and also a kind of feeling fed up with the humiliation that they've endured as a people, that women have endured on a daily basis, that their economy has endured, and the way that the people of the world have viewed them because of their government. This is an image from 1979 when women were participating in revolutionary activity that eventually toppled the Shah of Iran. And then in 1983, the veil was made mandatory. And this is a very interesting image that Canadian Broadcast Radio published recently of a woman arguing with a turbaned man, presumably part of the religious elite. But I want to sort of also preface everything that this is not unique to Iran. This is patriarchy. It's perhaps one of the most heinous versions of it in our modern world, but it's still patriarchy, and it's something that we need to recognize is not unique to Iran. And there's a tendency sometimes to kind of look at Iran like it's a monster and it's the most extreme of everything, but rather this is a continuum of patriarchal domination that women have been dealing with, and we're facing it right here in the United States with the attempt to ban abortions. The significance of the veil and what it meant for Iran and its establishment as a Islamic Republic was defining itself against the West, a rejection of Iran's pre-1979 past, when it had a close relationship with Western countries and it had the US-backed dictatorship of the Shah of Iran. It was a way to establish religious identity as a Shi'i nation unique to that part of the world, which was dominated by Sunni countries. And rather than thinking of it as a religious symbol, in the case of Iran, I think it's important to think of it as a state symbol that's been co-opted for purposes of controlling an image and an identity of modern Iran.
Persis, do you think you can put the presentation view of the PowerPoint? Is the little icon at the bottom?
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
No subtitles. Okay, I'm going to try and hurry along. I'm going to show you a couple images of women who've been challenging either compulsory veiling, the morality police, or attempts to limit women's mobility and access. This is a protest in 2005. Women were only until recently granted access to soccer stadiums. Women in Iran are big soccer fans, and they only allow a certain number of women into soccer stadiums. This is one such protest. This is an image of the morality police confronting a young woman. And Hasti knows a lot more about this, but she described it to me as constant harassment and humiliation, shaming. And one of the things she said to me was that they leave a lasting psychological effect on you when you have an encounter with people who are treating you so poorly. A major part of the morality police target women, but they're also supposed to regulate men. You know, men shouldn't be walking around bare-chested. But one of the things that I think has changed over time is that the morality police have kind of latitude to determine whatever and whenever they want. Sometimes they let women relax their hair coming out of the veil, sometimes not. And with the election of Raisi, many people have said that the morality police have become more strict. The discrimination that women experience isn't just in the physical spaces that they move in, it's also in laws. So women face all kinds of discriminatory laws in divorce, in employment, in marriage, in inheritance. So women's testimony is not considered equal to men's in a court situation. When there's a divorce, men are automatically granted custody of the child. Many of these laws were instituted in the early years of the Islamic Republic, and they have been challenged at various points by women's rights activists and human rights activists. And the most important one was the 1 Million Signatures campaign, which was an attempt between 2006 and 2008 to actually reform some of these laws from within. Some of you may know the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Shirin Ebadi. She was a lawyer. She was working on behalf of the 1 million signatures campaign. She was harassed, arrested multiple times. She won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that did not spare her. In 2009, when the elections were contested and lots of people were on the streets protesting, and many people were arrested, she was out of the country, and she is now in a permanent state of exile in England. She cannot return to Iran. And then another really important person is Nasrin Sotoudeh, who's in prison now. She endured a hunger fast almost a year and a half ago. She has a 14-year-long prison sentence. Her only crime, defending some of these women's rights activists and political dissidents. I wanted to point out that Mahsa Amini's death was not the first of many deaths by women, either by suicide or by beating or imprisonment. A very famous young woman named Sahar Khodayari, also known as the Blue Girl, was such a big soccer fan. She, in 2019, she attempted to go into the soccer stadium dressed as a man. They found her out. She was arrested a week later from when she was going to be facing a 6-month prison sentence. She set herself on fire. And that brings us to this moment when I think what we're seeing is women's very brave and courageous position, including girls as young as 10 years old protesting against the hijab. I think it's a moment where women in Iran are asking themselves, what kind of future can I have living in this country? And similarly, I think men too understand that. So that's why the people protesting on the streets are women and men. How am I doing on time, Blanca?
You have 1 minute left.
Okay. I think this has also sparked a transnational, or will, I hope, maybe it's optimistic, a transnational feminist movement around the globe where people are asking, how is it that women in Afghanistan, women in Iran are enduring these incredibly awful conditions where they're being subjected to humiliation, for example, at the hands of morality police, not being able to work, having to cover themselves from head to toe. And again, as I said, it's a more extreme version, but nonetheless, it's the attempt to control women through laws, through regulations of women's bodily autonomy. And this, I would argue, is really important for us to pay attention to, because we are certainly no strangers to this moment either in terms of our own country. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Persis. Maybe you want to stop the sharing screen. And then we're going to hear from our colleague, Maziar, very soon.
Thank you. As an historian, I don't like to predict the future, but I would like to talk about the current situation a little bit. Is this situation going to become a revolutionary situation? A revolutionary situation is a point when the state is toppled. Where is this going? And some of you may know Lenin, the Russian revolutionary. He said in 1913, the revolutionary situation arises when the tops cannot and the royal classes do not want to. And this translates into when the authorities, the state is not able or cannot manage under this old system. When that's one. Number two, the society is depressed and does not want to put up with the old system. That's number two. Number three, when people are able to organize themselves and act massively against the existing system. So 3 conditions for revolutionary situation. My argument is that out of the 3 above, only one of them is available, and the other 2 are missing. So the Islamic Republic politics in Islamic Republic have been mostly, for the past 43 years, without political parties. What you have is political factions. And these factions can be generally divided into three groups: reformers, pragmatics, and the principalists. What in the West they are known as the conservative faction. Every time elections allowed, obviously other candidates would be disqualified. But for the parliament and for the presidency, people from these three factions could run until the last election in May of 2021. And whenever these elections promised some sort of a change, people voted and tried to promote change. And the conservatives managed to basically sabotage that trend and stop it. We have reached a point now that with the election last year, May of 2021, the principalists basically purged everybody else and only allowed their own candidates to run. So they secured the presidency, the parliament, the judiciary, all under the same page, on the same page with the supreme leader, who is backed by the Revolutionary Guards. They, I think, in my opinion, they basically gave up and gaining the support of 90% of the population. They settled in a way for the 10% or so of their own social base. Satisfying them is the prime concern of the state at this point, facing a number of crises, one of which we are witnessing on our television screens, but there are others. There is a major economic crisis in Iran. I was there this summer. People are in a real bad shape. There is a major environmental crisis going on, not only drought like California, but really mismanagement of water resources. On the economic level, you have the sanctions, of course, by the United States, especially, but also corruption and mismanagement on the part of the state. And the political system is not, has decided, it seems to me, to create a uniform state of affairs in order to face this crisis. So for the first element of what I just described to you, when the authorities are not able to manage under the old system, we are not witnessing any sign of cracking a crack in the system. They are armed. The Revolutionary Guards are showing, and other security forces are showing loyalty, and you do not see any crack, not yet at least. The third part, when the people are to organize themselves and act massively against the existing system, we don't see that. What we are seeing is that a segment of the population, namely the youth, and of course women spearheading it, are challenging the system, and they're paying a heavy price. And that's why everybody is so angry. But a few years ago, in 2009, we had the Green Movement, where is my vote? The slogan, the main slogan was, where is my vote? Then you have the workers asking for their rights, and then you had the teachers, and then you had the pensioners. You do not see any of these groups which had faced off the regime during the previous years joining these demonstrations. There is certainly a lack of, as far as I can see, a lack of organization and a lack of leadership. The question is, where does this go without organization and without leadership? Can a leadership come from within? Can organization be created from within? Of course, many revolutions, those who study revolutions know that many revolutions start without nationwide organization and or leadership. but then in a process, leadership and organization kind of grows out of that movement. Is there a prospect for such a leadership and organization for the third element in what I just mentioned to you? I do not see it, at least. Therefore, what it seems to me is that what we are going to see, what we are saying is going to continue for a while. And I hope I'm wrong, but I think the regime is going to use all its weight and all what is at its disposal to put down this movement, because for a very simple reason. First of all, the movement, and here you can see there is no leadership or organization. The movement has moved, the opposition has moved from the issue of a veil to the slogan of toppling the regime very quickly. So there is no single demand that one can focus on and negotiate to get to push this one step forward. What you have is the totality of the regime must go. And of course, any regime, doesn't matter what regime, when its totality comes under question, it defends itself and uses all at its disposal to do that. If there was a movement which was organized and had leadership, perhaps they could move step by step, first moving against mandatory veil, and then move for other demands. But we don't see that. It has jumped from mandatory veil to toppling the regime. And for toppling the regime, you must have much more than just young people in the street shouting and getting shot. And that makes the prospect a little bit dimmer as far as I'm concerned. One last point regarding foreign policy and the nuclear issue. I hear many people asking the United States and the Europeans not to make a deal with Iran over the nuclear issue. One must remember that if the nuclear program of Iran is not put under United Nations supervision, IAEA, then there's only one option left, and that is war. Either Iran's nuclear program is put under the watchful eyes of the IAEA so that it can be managed, and for that Iran must be given some sort of concessions. The same Islamic Republic that is suppressing people inside must be given some concessions in order to do that, or I'm talking about lifting of some of the sanctions, or it will be war. And by war, I do not mean Iran is going to be occupied by a foreign army. That is very difficult to imagine. What is going to happen is heavy bombardment of Iran's facilities, infrastructure, and of course, Iran retaliating. And then it's going to be a big mess all over the Middle East. So that one must, in the middle of this crisis, in the middle of this anger, one must remember that the other issue, the nuclear issue, allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon or not, is going to be a big subject for whoever is dealing with Iran from the outside in the international community. They have to deal with this issue as well as issues of human rights and the protest movement in Iran. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maziar. Right on time. And now that we've heard these amazing presentations by Persis on the history of women's organizing that predates this period, and also Maziar, who has enlightened us about the internal situation of Iran, its political landscape, and then also the implications of this conflict, we're going to hear from Mahmood from International Relations. Go ahead, Mahmood.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be in the presence of such an illustrious speakers and audience. I'd like to give a shout out to both Persis and Blanca and the Diaspora Center for inviting us. Very delighted to be with you. There's always an advantage and a disadvantage to be the last speaker. The advantage is the last speaker has plenty of time to contemplate what he plans to talk about or what he or she wants to talk about. The disadvantage is that all the important points have already been made by the previous speakers. I'll do my best to actually give you a sort of a perspective that is a little bit different from what has been said here. I think the current regime in Iran is morally bankrupt and is incapable of reinventing itself. This is what they are. This is what their identity, and they cannot reinvent themselves. So I don't know what the option is, but when I look at the sequence and frequency of the protest intervals, students protest 1999, 10 years after that, Green Movement, 2009. Then 2017, the water shortage, environmental problems. And then 2019, and then 2019, the increase in the gas prices that led to all kind of unrest. When I look at these intervals of the protest intervals, they're getting shorter and shorter. And the reason is that the government is failing them. And the new waves of the protest, to me, they can be best described as anti-systematic protests, that they may not be subsided by simply making few concessions here or there. I think the clerical establishment, conservative clerical establishment, has consistently sidelined those reformists that have tried to reform the system from within. That was the point that was articulated very eloquently by Professor Behrooz. As a result, the protesters, I would argue, especially the women, have lost hope in the future, and they are unlikely to accept the status quo. I don't know how we can get rid of the status quo, but a status quo is not acceptable anymore. These round of protest may be suppressed, as some people would argue that they will. But the next round, I can promise you, is going to be just around the corner, because these protests are going to continue. It is clearly too early at this point, and I agree with Professor Behrooz on that, to predict or gauge the full impact and the consequences of these protests, or whether or not these protests will upend the system. I don't know at this point. All I know that these protests promote, they promise to be a game changer. I think for the reasons that were very nicely articulated by Professor Karim, they are transformational, at least in their appearance. I don't know about the substance and how far they can go. The protesters' demand, to me, amounts to a direct challenge and defiance of the 43-year-old reign of the clerics who have ruled Iran since 1979. The slogan, which was articulated by first two speakers, Hasti and Professor Karim, women, life, and freedom, has gained tremendous traction. And I agree that it has, the women's movement is transnational, is cross-cutting matter. It resonates deeply with different social classes. It is widespread both geographically and ethnically. There are Kurds supporting Arabs, the Arabs supporting the Turks, and really it's just going across the country ethnically. And I think what I'm seeing right now, I'm seeing a fundamental shift in the imagination of the young boys and girls that I have never seen in the last 43 years that I left Iran. That imagination is tremendous in terms of the depth and the breadth that I can see that. Yes, of course, the problems that Professor Behrooz mentioned, there are long festering socio-political grievances, and this system is incapable of addressing them. As to the sanctions policy, I would argue that the problem with sanctions is that they too often hurt the people, not the government. Today, not as a result of sanctions alone, and I agree with Professor Behrooz, you have mismanagement of the economy, you have, corruption, you have repressive systems. As a result of all this combined, we have 1 out of 3 people living in poverty. That means that close to 30 million of Iranians, as we speak, they live in poverty. Long-standing and suffocating US-led sanctions, they have really done tremendous damage to the Iranian people, not to the government. The last time I checked inflation, the data that I have is as of August 25th, 2022. The inflation rate, that is a formal inflation based on the Ministry of Labor, hovers around or even stands above 50%, which makes life very difficult for the ordinary Iranian people. Sanctions are, again, I repeat, because that's the key point. Sanctions too often hurt the people and strengthen the hardliner camp. I think I agree with Professor Maziar Behrooz that diplomacy right now, even if you're living under these strenuous conditions, this diplomacy is the most impactful way to prevent more sanctions and also diminishing the possibility of conflict between Iran and the United States. If Western countries decide to walk away from the nuclear deal, they're going to strengthen the hands of the hardliners in Iran. And the hardliners are going to turn Iran into yet another North Korea, using their political isolation and using the sanctions as a cover to more repressed Iranian people. And the sanctions are going to push Iran more into the arms of China and Russia, as we have seen that in the last 3 years. So, there are 2 ways of going about this. There are some people who are saying that sanctions should continue because there are coups de grace, because they're going to be the last fatal thing that could break the straw that can break the back of the camel. But I strongly believe that sanctions typically could result into strengthening I'm sorry, there are jets going over my head in my area that are interfering with the presentation here. My apology for that. Sanctions are likely to strengthen the hands of the hardliners camp, and they would hurt the Iranian people tremendously. So let me stop at this point. Be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahmood, for your presentation, and thank you really to the 4 of you for sharing your thoughts and your insights. So there's been a few questions or topics that have been coming up in the chat, so I'm gonna try to summarize them and then pass the mic back to you for short answers. And while I speak, you can post other questions. There's been a lot of questions about something that Maziar touched upon his presentation, the lack of leadership or the need of leadership from this movement, right? Like, and we in the US have been confronted to this too. We have explosions of people in the streets and then they subsume. So I wonder if either Persis, Hasti have something to say about that. And there were also questions about the revolutionary situation and the role of teachers, but maybe we can start with the question of leadership. I don't know specifically if Persis or Hasti has something to say about any incipient or emergent leadership from within this movement that is developing.
I'll just tell you a little anecdote. Last night I went to a protest in Berkeley, and I saw an old friend of mine, and I asked him that very question, what about leadership? And he said that what he has seen among the videos, that he's been doing this verification of videos, and he said, I've seen over 1,000 videos. He said that the preoccupation with leadership is not on the minds of most people right now. They're so angry and want to get rid of the regime, and they're afraid of leaders and leadership because of past experiences. So the way he characterized it is that it's because it's leaderless, it's malleable and flexible. But he was also saying that the kind of feeling is neither east nor west. We want to determine our own. So I don't know if that resonates with what you, Maziar, or Hasti or Mahmood have heard, but I think the immediacy of getting rid of the regime seems to be the preoccupation at this moment. I mean, I have, of course, the fear that like what happens when they actually topple the regime. If they do, there's always a power vacuum, and we know what that can lead to, of course, more abuse and more controlling regimes, or foreign interventions, or interventions from bordering countries. So I don't have any insights really.
Hasti, do you want to say something about this topic?
Yeah, I think we're all to some degree nervous about the movement being hijacked, and they're like just wondering if like how we're gonna proceed. But also I do know that one thing that is making this movement very scary and confusing for the regime is this fact that it doesn't have any leaders. That makes it so much more complicated to, I guess, suppress for them. Yeah, and I'm very impressed by the collective intelligence of the people, because you can't, like with what happened in the last revolution and it basically being hijacked by Khomeini, I feel like there's a lot of cynicism with the people, and they're not just gonna be able to very easily trust anyone. So I feel like that's expected, and since this is so new and so different from a lot of other movements, I guess we do have to question our beliefs about whether like there has to be a leader now, or at some, like the timeline is, we don't know. I guess all I can say is that we don't know a lot. And yeah.
Thank you, Hasti. I see another question on the chat by our colleague Jen Blecha. She says, related to the sanctions question, what about the release of the 7 billion? Shouldn't we delay the nuclear agreement so not to infuse those funds to the current regime? So this is a specific question, and I don't know if someone wants to reply to that. Maziar, go ahead.
Any day that the nuclear issue is delayed, the nuclear compromise is delayed, is a day that Iran gets closer to having it. They know it in Tehran and in Washington. And so there are only two ways left. Either you compromise with the same government to put Iran's nuclear program under supervision of IAEA, international agency, or prepare to bomb the country if you want to prevent it from having nuclear weapons. Iran has the technology and has the facilities to make the bomb. It's just a matter of time. North Korea did it. Pakistan did it. Israel did it. India did it. The technology is 70 years old. It's not a big deal. They can do it. They have the brain already. Why do you think Israelis are shooting Iranian scientists? Because they want to eliminate the knowledge, but the knowledge is already there. The only thing is you have to come to some sort of a compromise agreement with this same government, so that Iran would benefit from lifting of some of the sanctions in exchange for putting its nuclear program under the supervision of IAEA. I mean, there's no other way. This is not a very complex algebra equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maziar. Mahmood, do you want to answer this question? Or should we
Blanca,
move on?
if I may address the previous questions, I was on mute. I couldn't get into the
Yeah,
previous
oh, for sure.
questions.
Go for it.
Yeah, on the topic of the neither west nor east, Persis, I should say that Iranians have abandoned that mantra. They are clearly looking to the east. They all already signed long-term treaties with both Russia and China. There are no longer the mantra of neither west nor east is just a dead thing. It was at the beginning of the revolution, but it's totally outmoded. The other thing is that I would like to have a sort of a discussion with Professor Behrooz on that. Professor Behrooz, you realize that in Egypt in 2011, after 3 weeks, peaceful demonstrations forced Hosni Mubarak to step down. I'm not talking about what happened. El-Sisi came and Mohamed Morsi was elected and the consequences of it. As you said, we are not in the business of talking about consequences at this point, but there is a glimmer of hope that in less than 3 weeks, peaceful demonstrations led by tech-savvy people inside the country of Egypt and outside, those who actually were controlling the digital technology that came together, they forced Hosni Mubarak to step down. So there is a hope that even if you don't have a structure, organization, leadership, you don't have the financial resources, but the powers, the people's power can go to the street and through peaceful demonstrations and through wider representation, they could force a person who was in power for 30 years, they forced him to resign.
Here is my point. Remember, a few years later, General Sisi shot 5,000 people from waist up and put it down. And the military took over and is still on, and is a very good friend of the United States. My point is that Hosni Mubarak and Sisi do not have the type of support, the 10% that I told you about,
Correct.
As their base, that this government still has. That's a big difference. You have to take that put that into the equation. They are trying, when they go after women for veil, and somebody said it is correct, after Raisi came to power, they doubled their effort to enforce veil. But why are they doing it? They are addressing their base, not the 90%, but the 10%. The base is important to them now. Sisi, Mubarak, Abedin, what was his name in Tunisia? The spring, the Arab Spring. They didn't have a social base. This government still has. That's my point.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I mean, there is one question that's been posed. One is the role of the teachers, but also the idea that the unions will maybe join in this movement and the different sectors of Iran that have mobilized in these past years, because as Dr. Behrooz said, there has been mobilizations since 2017. What happened if all of these sectors were to enter together? And I just want to share that the Coordinating Council of Iranian Educators, like the Federation of Teachers, has called for a 2-day solidarity strike, and that happened first in solidarity with the protest. And not only they supported the strike, they further also encouraged the high school students to go on strike. And this past week, the teachers have been organizing with the students to support them. And there's the first union that so far has joined in, right? The other union, I think, that threatened to maybe do strike action in solidarity with women and the youth has been the Oil Workers Union, which also was one of the main unions going on strike the last 2 years. They have not called a strike so far, but they have told the regime, if you keep the repression, we might also do a work stoppage. So there is a beginning of coalescing. I think that this last week, I think it's been the youth that has, like university students and high school students that have massively taken on, right, and occupying the schools and shutting down the universities. But I know Persis wants to speak. And then I think there's an interesting question here that maybe we want to address. Someone, one of our community members who identifies as non-binary is asking how queer and non-binary people can be part of this women movement, right? What would be a way of connecting with a slogan that is very gendered in so many ways, right? And I don't know if some of the speakers here have ways to maybe do that junction of solidarity. But go ahead, Persis. I know you wanted to speak.
Oh, actually, no, I'm gonna let Hasti take this one. I responded to the person in a chat form because I feel like it's a complicated question. Hasti, do you want to say anything about that category of woman?
Yeah. Oh, well, I've been thinking about this a lot, and my personal conclusion is that sadly there can't be a lot of nuance when you're coming up with slogans and when you're just like reacting collectively to the death of a woman because of not wearing hijab, which is something that is inflicted on women in Iran. So I feel like I can't think of any way that you can cultivate nuance into that language. I wish there could, but I do know that this movement does, like a lot of queer activists and LGBTQ activists are with this movement, and it is like a very intersectional feminism that is like underneath the idea of women, life, freedom, because it's not about women, as we all know, it's about the marginalized communities and like the hierarchy of the Islam, like the Muslims and the men being on top, the mullahs, like, and then everybody else falling into this category of the other. So it is completely aligned with the rights of the LGBTQ community. But yeah, the slogan, I don't know, like maybe someone else can help me. Like,
I think you answered it the way I would have answered it, is that in the context of Iran, or even I would say in Afghanistan, that there's not a lot of nuance that is available for people to identify outside the binary of male, female, woman, man. And therefore the slogan in some ways is responding to the immediacy of this moment, i.e. Mahsa Amini's death and all the other women, but also the way that gender, I would say it's a good slogan for thinking about the way gender is being policed so severely to the point that it's willing to kill people to enforce it. And I think, you know, that's also, like, interestingly, we're policing gender here in our own context, except we're policing the non-binary trans people. So I think it's hard sometimes to take a conversation that's really germane to one context and apply it to the immediacy of what's happening in a place like Iran, which is not to say we shouldn't have it. I'm just saying I think it's a difficult thing, but I like what you said about the people who are marginalized and who are policed and who are suffering at the hands of these rigid categories.
I'm going to bring up two sets of things that have come up in the chat through different comments. One is obviously the possibility of a US intervention into this process, like the fear that if the regime is toppled, will the US intervene more strongly? And even someone shared that the foreign minister of Iran from 2013 to 2021 was educated in the US. And I know there's been a long history of the US-Iran relations. So I wonder if some of the speakers could share with us what are the things to watch for, what are the instincts we should have here from the United States to make sure that the destiny of the Iranian people remains in the hands of the Iranian people, which is maybe one of the big roles we can play. So I don't know if you want to address that aspect, and then we can move to another one. Okay, go ahead, Maziar.
Yes, of course, the ideal case is for the destiny to be in the hand of Iranian people. But the reality is, once a breakdown occurs, like in Syria, other governments in the neighborhood and international forces like the United States will intervene. And they usually make an even worse mess of the situation. Look at Syria, look at Libya, look at Iraq. And none of these have anything even close to stability after intervention of their neighbors and also of European and American forces. So, I don't want to be pessimistic. We are kind of between a rock and a hard place in this. And there is a fine line to be walked. And yes, the destination of Iranian people should be in their hand. But if there is chaos, everybody will intervene, and everybody wants a piece of a cake, of a pie.
Blanca, can I address the portion of this, one part of this question?
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned that the Iranian foreign minister was educated in USA. I think you're referring to Javad Zarif. And by the way, he had a degree from San Francisco State University, got his master's degree from San Francisco State before he moved to Colorado for his PhD program. I think the group under Hassan Rouhani, the group that were forming his cabinet, they were very inclined to work out a deal with USA. And the problem, which by the way, might come out a little bit presumptuous on my part, I just published a book on In the Shadow of Mistrust. We looked at the US-Iran diplomacy and geopolitics. The problem was that when Trump administration came along, they withdrew from a deal which had multilateral support. And that really intensified the mistrust of the present regime in Iran, not only moving toward the East, but also marginalizing the reformist movement. Because they say, Hassan Rouhani and your team went for a nuclear deal, but it didn't actually pan out because the next president of the United States actually pulled out from that agreement. So I think Zarif did his best to at least construct some kind of agreement that could over time have results in the best interest of the countries concerned. But then you have President Trump comes from nowhere and suddenly withdraws, and it kills the deal, and it really marginalizes the reformist movement. If there was any hope of reformist movement trying to work out a deal, that hope was actually dashed dramatically.
Thank you, Mahmood. Persis, do you also wanted to take on this question?
Actually, I think they answered it well.
Okay.
If there's other questions, I think we should move towards those.
Well, there was a question that I think was in response to what Maziar said, that the current regime has a 10% support. And the questions were like, well, who is supporting this regime and why, right? And I don't know if we can go a little bit more in depth about that. I mean, what would be the reasons for a section of the population to support the current regime in Iran, and and that which will explain the difference between Iran and Egypt, according to Maziar. And then there were many questions about how to get involved and learn more about that, but maybe we can leave that for the end of the meeting. But I don't know if Maziar, you want to talk a little bit more about this, who's supporting the current regime and why, or Mahmood, or also Hasti, whoever wants to answer this.
Mahmood has.
Maziar, would you like to go first?
No, go ahead.
Yes. Well, you have something in the vicinity of, from the data that I have, possibly 150,000 members of the Revolutionary Guards. And then you have the Basijis, who are the militia hand of the government. And they are in plain clothes. And then you have the morality police. And then you have the army. Somebody in the chat asked whether or not there is a possibility of a coup or something. I do not see that possibility. It's not high on my order of priorities here. I don't see that happening. In Iran, you have the army, but the army has been defanged and has made less effective in terms of the potential of violence and the power. So you do have some people who are benefiting from the deals that this regime is involved. All kind of black markets, all kind of trying to find imports and export into the country. So I think Maziar is correct. If you have something in the vicinity of 10 million supporters of of 85 or 86 million, you have a small number, but they are the ones that control the means of the violence, and they are the ones that control the economy of the country, and they're the ones that they know how to bypass and go around sanctions, and they are largely involved in import and export business. So that 10% seems to stand to reason.
Are there any other comments on this, or should we move to the next question? No, I just want to read what our colleague Elif wrote here that was echoed by our colleague Fatima. She says, I think seeing what's happening in Iran is also helpful for us here in the United States to think different representations of Islam or what it means to be a Muslim woman or other marginalized entities. The way we see such oppression is usually very US-centric. And I think it is important to recognize how these news touch and impact so many women coming from violent family, state, and regional backgrounds, and finding ways for them to connect and contribute. And I think this has to do also an echo about the representations of Islam in the US, right? And the way Iran is portrayed by the media, right? And I think Persis echoed a little bit about that, and because the role of the university is to engage in critical thinking, as we're doing here today, and the commitment to social justice that San Francisco has, I wonder if some of the speakers want to comment a little bit on this question of the representations of Iran and Iranian women and Islam, and what it means to be a Muslim, and the way we can maybe improve the way we live together and work together in the university. So I'm going to leave it open, but I think this is also a moment to sometimes reflect about the way we relate to foreign countries. So I don't know if someone wants to speak on this.
Okay, go ahead, Persis, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that's resonating with for me at this moment is how Iran and Iranians become very hyper visible at these moments when Iranians are protesting against their government, 2009, 2019, when the plane was shot down, and then most recently. For me, the issue of how we represent Iran and how we represent Islam and how we represent women it's very convoluted by national interests on the part of the US, and also a national discourse in the US about Islam, and Islamic terrorism has been conflated with everybody in the Middle East without any distinction about Islam as a religious category. So for me, it's kind of troubling because I think in some ways we're called to explain both Islam, and we're also called to explain Iran and the versions of Islam that are promoted and policed inside of Iran. So I think the other thing is that there's no other information about Iran except for this narrative about, Iran's regime being our boogeyman. And there's nothing else that gets through, certainly not in the media, and very little any other places, unless you actually go make it and you promote it and you cultivate it, which I am interested in doing in my capacity. And so I think one of the things that is interesting about this moment is that the category of woman is opening up something new for people to think a little bit about Iran and Islam, because you can also see women marching in the streets who do have a veil, right? We're often left with this binary, like veiled and unveiled, or the veil is oppressive. So for me, I think it's important to account for the idea of choice, and also to account for the idea that, like, in the same way that people are being policed in Iran. In France, they're being policed about wearing the veil. And that has its own problematic history in that context. So it's, for me, the important thing is to sort of put those questions side by side and say, it's not really about veiling, it's about state control, you know? State control over a narrative about national identity, about religious identity, about our former colonies, for example, in France. It's about marginalization. And I think we have to kind of return to that again, even when we're talking about women as a category. So I didn't really articulate it very well, but I think it's a really, like, it's rife with possibilities and rife with problems.
I think you articulated very well. And then we're going to hear from Maziar too. Go ahead.
I agree. I agree with Persis. This is a particular interpretation of what the state, the principalists think Islam is. You have it in the United States too. Is the KKK Christian, Protestant Christian? Are those people in this some of the states where they burn the Quran? Are they doing it for political reasons, to get attention? Pastors are doing that. So that's a certain interpretation, I think. I agree with Persis. I'm going to leave it there.
Blanca, I wanted to comment on that. I
Yeah.
think this is a very important point. Look, 54% of the university graduates in Iran are female. They're tech savvy. They are connected with the rest of the world. They're highly educated. And I don't think they need to be lectured on the modesty of dress code, because they know what is modest and what is not modest. It is an upfront to ladies who constitute the vast majority of the Iranians who graduate. And there are more girls in Iran who have higher degrees, college degrees, than the men. And that has really changed the society. There's a paradigm shift going on in terms of mentality of marriage. Do you marry with a boy that is at your status or above a status? If girls are waiting for marrying the boys that at or above their status, they cannot find their husbands. Everything has changed. So I think Islamic Republic should recognize that choice should be given to these educated people. You don't educate people and then you ask them not to ask for the rights. I mean, you don't train a person to be a good swimmer and then you turn around and say, I want to unteach you. You're not, you welcome them to the party, and then you can say, I'm going to uninvite you to the party. This is not going to work. That's the contradiction and paradox the Islamic Republic finds constantly itself in that paradigm, in this complex.
Thank you. And because we're approaching the end of our very thrilling conversation today, I just want to give back the mic to our speakers, maybe to leave us with some comments about, one, what can we do from the United States to support this movement, to do it in a way where we're not enforcing or reinforcing these stereotypes or like these relations and narratives that are put forward by our own government. And also, I know Persis can share how we will be able to make this recording available, so we can, other community members of the university can watch it. But maybe we just, you can wrap up with some thoughts about what is ahead of us and how can we stand in solidarity. I know folks in the chat were asking, are there going to be more rallies? Where to find information about the solidarity protest? How can I educate myself more about this? So I'm just gonna give you maybe 3 to 4 minutes each to kind of sum up your thoughts and leave us with things to do, things to learn, and a good spirit to move forward. Go ahead. I don't know who wants to go first.
Hasti, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, what I have in mind is that since the internet is cut off now and people are still in the streets, I thought I'd managed to talk to my friend today. So the movement still is going, but in this void that is created by the internet shutdown, more people get killed every day, and there isn't enough media coverage. So just like something as simple as keeping the hashtags going can help less people be killed. I know that sounds silly, but it's true. And just echoing the voice of the people who are risking their lives in the street, and not forgetting that they're not numbers, that like not forgetting their humanities, just like remembering that they are being very brave and they are really good at fighting this after losing so many times. So yeah, I guess what I can think of that is at least easy enough to do is to being there, echoing their voice.
Thank you, Hasti. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I want to say also that one of the things people can do is pressure the media to keep the story going. Just because we don't have on the ground footage every day of people getting beaten up, this is a conversation that is worthy of being broadcast. So there are lots of smart people in this country who know a lot about Iran, and I know at least 25 people I can count on my hands who are professors, activists, researchers. So if you want something to do, encourage the national news media to engage the story, not by, just reporting the daily events, but also giving voice to some of their knowledge. There's a dearth of experts in the, in the White House and in the foreign policy apparatus who know very much. They're all in academia or they're activists. So it's really important to commit the media to keeping the story going, even if they don't have this, the on the ground footage. The other thing I want to say is that right now there are thousands of people that are in jail, and Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Campaign for Human Rights in Iran were already taxed by the amount of work that they were doing in Iran. There were so many prisoners of conscience from previous protests and previous movements, and Nasrin Sotoudeh is one of the better known ones. She was, part of a campaign for amnesty for almost 3 years. That takes resources. So I can't stress enough how important it is to donate money to human rights work, because they're the ones who can do anything at all. They have the credibility, they have the international networks, that nobody else has. And they're probably the most neutral, right? In terms of, governments don't like human rights groups, but they have a certain amount of standing in the world. So donate money to those organizations, read their pages. They have petitions, they have letter writing campaigns. And then the other thing I want to say is this, I saw a question about, the diaspora. There are divisions. It's not a united community of people who live outside of Iran in this country. Some people want actually a foreign intervention. Some people would love to see a military, result come from this moment. I think we should really encourage at every moment that we stand in solidarity as much as we can, and let the will of the people of Iran be the thing that determines their future. I hear what Mahmood and Maziar were saying about some of the dark actors who are at play in this, but I think one of the things that we can insist upon in doing solidarity work is to support the people on the streets and to echo what they are saying. And the slogan I heard over and over again last night was also, Iran wants democracy. And I think we don't know what that's going to look like and if it's even going to happen. But I think insisting on slogans that are not the same old ones also. I'm not a big fan of Marg bar Dictator, because I want to see life being promoted, And then finally, I think it's really important to write op-eds, write letters to the editor, the media controls a narrative, and we have to break that narrative and intervene there, because it's the only way people care about Iran is if there are people who are caring about it in very visible ways.
Thank you, Persis. So is it Maziar or Mahmood that goes first now?
Yeah, go please. Go ahead, please.
People care about Iran, Persis, to do what? To put pressure on US government. The US government has these severest sanctions on Iran. There's no other country that has been under more severe sanctions by the United States government. It can't even move its own money from one location to the other unless it loads it on a plane. That's how severe and strict it is. So in the US, in the United States, the situation is a little bit different than, let's say, in Europe. In Europe, these governments have relationship with Iran. They have diplomatic relationship, they have, to a degree, they have economic relationship with Iran. They lobbying them, bringing public opinion behind the cause to put pressure on those governments, to put pressure on Iranian government to deal better with Iranian people in the streets. That makes sense. But in the United States, this government doesn't even, the two even don't sit on the same table to talk to each other. For the nuclear issue, one of them is sitting in the other room, the other one is sitting here, and the European go-betweens, they don't even talk to each other. So demonstrations in the United States is good for the community because the community is angry. And those non-Iranians who support this community, who sympathize with them, that's good in Berkeley, in San Francisco. But it does have no meaning in Iran. If these demonstrations get international media attention and broadcast into Iran, okay, that's good. That gives people in the street some sort of they know people outside are thinking about them, are with them. But other than that, if local CBS picks up the news, doesn't mean anything. Local CBS is in Bay Area. That's one point. The other point, one of the users, I saw a text by Alba about VPNs. In Iran, everybody has VPNs, Tor and other ones. The problem is very much like China, very much like other places. They slow down the national internet and bring it down. So VPN doesn't work there that much. That's the problem. If the national internet is on, like this summer, I had VPNs and I could watch everything I wanted. But if there's a strict crisis, let's say in Kurdistan, in Iranian Kurdistan, they shut down the internet totally. In Baluchistan recently, they have done it. They killed about over 100 people there 2 days ago, 48 hours ago. So a VPN is not the problem. The problem is that the government controls the faucet and it shuts it down when there is crisis, so that communication would become difficult. They cannot totally shut it down because they have to have communication for business with the outside world themselves. This is a global village now. They cannot totally shut it down. So they're trying to learn from China, for example, how the Chinese are handling their experimentation with this. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Maziar.
Yes, there's some final thoughts. I strongly believe in international pressure. I strongly believe in the idea that Professor Karim mentioned, that if we support NGOs that have networks on the ground, they have reputation for pushing for human rights, we are doing ourselves a favor. We're doing ourselves no favor if we are pretending that international pressure is no more. It doesn't have any effect. I think, and I hope, through international pressure, we can make sure that hijab becomes optional, not compulsory, I hope, and I also predict that the morality police will be or must be abolished. And my third wish is that international community ought to provide Iranian youth with the type of digital technology that they can bypass all kind of sanctions, all kind of the problems that the government imposes on people and creates internet blackout. I think there are techniques that can be provided to the youth in Iran, and they are smart enough, they are tech savvy enough to use those digital technology to be able at least to communicate their message, not only among themselves, but between themselves and the rest of the world. And these are hopes that I hope that they materialize in the near future. Thank you.
May I add something quickly regarding helping Iran?
Yeah.
Elon Musk just asked the US government to lift the sanction so that he can project these satellites he has around the planet into Iran. But what people don't understand is that you need to have a receiver, a modem, and a dish. It's $600, and they are not in Iran. And it takes few years. If even they give it to people for free, which I doubt they will, it's about $600. So it is a lot of good words. Yes, we are going to give free internet to the Iranians, but for it to materialize, even if it is free, it takes 2 to 3 years. It's not going to happen tomorrow for the movement that we are talking about.
Thank you, Maziar. So I want to thank everybody who came and participated to our forum today, specifically to our 4 presenters, specifically to Hasti for sharing her participation and her engagement in this struggle. We've been sharing over the chat the protest coming up. There's one in San Francisco tomorrow, right? There's also several articles that have been shared. And I think there was the mention of maybe us engaging as a community to support maybe the civil rights organizations, the nonprofits that are doing the defense work, at least to free the political prisoners. Here at San Francisco State, faculty, librarians, coaches, and counselors are unionized, and I happen to be in the executive board in the union. And we made a solidarity statement with Ukraine, and we can also make a solidarity statement with Iran, and even make a donation, like collect money from our colleagues to send to some of the trusted NGOs, the trusted civil rights organizations. So we express materially our solidarity from working people organized in the United States to working people, youth and women fighting directly in Iran without having to pass through the transactions of our own government, right? So that could be a proposal we can entertain. And so if the colleagues want to do this, they can email me and I can facilitate that in the union if we want to do that. But I want to thank everybody. We can also bring that to the Academic Senate for sure. So thank you all. We're gonna try to put this recording on YouTube as to be available and share the link. If you wanna have the link, email me, Professor Blanca Missé at San Francisco State. You will find me in the Modern Languages Department, or email Professor Karim, and we'll make it available, okay? So thank you.
Also encourage you all to watch the film Coup 53. You have to register through the center. Dr. Maziar Behrooz will be in conversation with Dr. Ervand Abrahamian on November 10th at 4:30 p.m. It's really important to know something about Iran's earlier history to give some context to this moment. So I hope to see some of you at that event as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks, Blanca.